Yet another New York Times employee has called it quits because of the publication's liberal agenda. Just yesterday, a New York Times writer released a scathing 1,500-word letter referencing constant bullying by colleagues and a hostile work environment for her reason for leaving. Take a look at this. That employee is a self-proclaimed left-leaning centrist, Bari Weiss. She wrote this. They have called me a Nazi and a racist. I have learned to brush off comments about how I'm writing about the Jews again. Well, by the way, Weiss wrote a book called How to Fight Anti-Semitism a couple of years ago. Ironic. To break this down, we're going to bring in Steve Krauker, the founder and editor of Fourth Watch and former senior digital producer at CNN. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Steve, what does this say about the New York Times when a self-described liberal thinks that they are not being open and diverse enough? I mean, that shows you how far crazy left they've gone, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I think it really shows with this period of time. And, Bari also mentioned Twitter in her letter. And I think that's so key to this because Twitter represents this very niche, very minority point of view when it comes to all Americans. But in newsrooms like the New York Times, this is the majority point of view. And if you are not, as Bari describes, as woke or prescribed to these microaggressions like Bari does, and it doesn't matter if you're liberal or in Bari's case, female, Jewish, LGBT. In fact, her girlfriend works in the New York Times newsroom as well. Refuses to prescribe to this orthodoxy that is again such a small minority of people dictated by this new Twitterverse that we're in.
Something else that Weiss wrote in her resignation letter, criticizing the New York Times for their selection of stories. I'd like to pull that up so our viewers can see. She says stories are chosen and told in a way to satisfy the narrowest of audiences rather than to allow a curious public to read about the world and then draw their own conclusion. Steve, we talk about this all the time from the right point of view, but now it seems like the left is getting fed up with the left, essentially, and they're finally getting a taste of their own medicine and saying, hey, we're sick of this themselves and calling it out.
Yeah, and look, I think there's two very distinct, situations going on with the New York Times. On one hand, there's the news coverage, and we can say, whether it's a bias or a liberal bias or a geographic bias, which I believe that there is as well. But, Bari Weiss works in the opinion section. That we are supposed to hear from a wide swath of points of view and for different perspectives, and particularly perspectives that may not adhere to what everyone at the New York Times thinks. That is happening less and less, and that's really a new development in the Trump era. That was not always this case before 2016.
Hey, Steve, I want to switch gears for a second. We covered a story earlier this week that you and your site Fourth Watch broke, which was this whole idea that there was a doctor who is an NBC contributor that was going on NBC programs talking about the fact that he had COVID, that NBC was promoting the fact that he had COVID, he was a victim of the disease, when in fact he had tested negative multiple times, and in fact had even tested negative for the antibodies. And yet NBC News has not said a word about this to retract it. Lindsay pointed out the other day that they still have stories up about this. Have you seen any development so far about NBC taking responsibility for this?
No development. In fact, I've reached out to NBC multiple times over the last month. They would refuse to comment on the record about this story. And that stays the same this week from what I'm reading and from what I'm seeing. No, look, I don't necessarily think that there is some hoax or some lie that's happening. I mean, Dr. Fair is the reason we know that he tested negative for coronavirus at least 5 times. He tweeted about this. The problem is he goes on these programs, Today's Show, Nightly News. He's on Meet the Press, and there is no reference. I mean, there was very early on in mid-May, but he's going on in June, and it's about, tell us about your recovery from coronavirus, when clearly he didn't have coronavirus. And the last step was that antibody test. Tested negative again for that. No corrections that have come from NBC. And this really hurts viewers. I mean, there's enough to be scared about with coronavirus than to think you could be testing negative 5 times and still have it.
Steve, something else that Fourth Watch has reported on, and we just talked to Lee Zeldin about this, was this poster from Andrew Cuomo. And Jake Tapper actually went out of the norm for CNN and actually criticized Governor Cuomo for his poster. I mean, it's just ridiculous when you have somebody gloating about something that they've done that actually has not been that positive and tooting their own horn.
It's unbelievable. I do wonder how that's going in the CNN in the newsroom with Chris Cuomo and Jake Tapper. But look, I appreciate Jake Tapper doing this. It's true, and I have to say, Governor Andrew Cuomo pretty much got out of this politically unscathed during this entire time, and he would have continued down this path if he hadn't gone and tried to gloat this way. I mean, this poster he is selling, and it's not going to charity. This is a poster that you could just spend $11.50 and go buy, and you cover the cost of printing it. Apparently, it's unbelievable. It obviously leaves out all of the massive failures that he had when it comes to nursing home, when it comes to closing down too late, when it comes to the subways not even being cleaned until into May. Look, there is, I think there's a lot of blame to go around when it comes to COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're in. But to go out of your way, to go on this ridiculous victory tour is finally wearing thin with the media that covered for Governor Andrew Cuomo for a very long time.
You know, Steve, the thing that I think is interesting with respect to this is that the media all went nuts yesterday about President Trump having a press conference in the Rose Garden where he teed off on political stuff. And yet Cuomo does this poster, which is completely political, and there's really not a ton of negative coverage of it.
No, I mean, and this honestly, if you compare the press conferences from Governor Andrew Cuomo to the press conferences from Donald Trump in the height of this pandemic, there was a lot of crossover, I have to say. And I think, Donald Trump got criticized for it, and Governor Andrew Cuomo didn't get criticized at all for it. And we are just starting to see the seeds of that. And I think it is because of how over the top Governor Andrew Cuomo is. I mean, can you imagine if Donald Trump started selling posters about his coronavirus response? I mean, it's one thing to talk about it, but to sell posters about it, I mean, it is completely ridiculous. And the media is finally catching on to this governor in New York.
You're absolutely right. And again, I love what you guys are doing at Fourth Watch. I really would love to have you back again because you're doing a great job of keeping people honest and just calling balls and strikes. So thanks for coming on and sharing the work with us. Look forward to having you back real soon.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, well, a sports legend questioning a lack of outrage for anti-Semitism in sports and in Hollywood, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, says history continues to repeat itself. We'll discuss with our company right after the break.